Well, and you know, for all of us as educators, I think the thing we all strive for and look forward to most is the day when one of our own students exceeds us. So it's such a blessing to get to look at that person today. So it's wonderful to be here with Jennifer and also with you, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ. So we're going to talk about the purpose of a teacher. And as we are all teachers here, we're going to begin with a quiz. So now, quick. Who won Best Actress at the Academy Awards? Who won the Super Bowl in February? The World Series last year? Who was Donald Trump's first Attorney General? Who was Hillary Clinton's running mate? Quick. Can you remember? Are you struggling? Well, I'm sure you are struggling a little. We all would struggle. But now, quick. Who was your first grade teacher? Right? So I bet you know that name right away. And isn't it interesting that the names that once dominated the newspapers and the talk shows disappear from our memories, while a person we haven't seen in 20, 30, 40, 50, or in my case, 60 years, is just right on the tip of our tongues. Now, why is that? I suspect it's because that at the dawn of your life as a student, at that transition from those days of unstructured play to the daily discipline of formal study, you were touched by someone who awakened something in you, a joy of learning and a love of school. Your teacher did something for you like the morning sun does for the closed bud of a water lily. She warmed you up and you burst open. You drank in the glorious sunshine of those early school days, and so how could you ever forget someone like that? My first grade teacher's name was Mrs. Harsh. Now that's not her, that's Norman Rockwell. But as a person, Mrs. Harsh was exactly the opposite. She was never sour or stern, but was always cheerful and smiling, glad to see us children every single day, ready with something new and interesting and exciting to do. Endlessly patient, so grown up, and she was probably all of 25, and very, very pretty. I look forward to going to school every day. Now, what do I remember about the actual first grade lessons 6 decades later? I have to admit, not very much. But I must have learned how to print because I know how. And I must have learned how to tell the difference between pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters because I never confused those coins. And I must have learned how to tell time too, because I can remember my mom getting annoyed at me when I was forever asking, "Do you want me to tell you what time it is?" I'm sure there are teachers that you remember too, like Charlie remembers Mrs. Weber, the way I remember Mrs. Harsh. Now, it might not have been your first grade teacher, but maybe it was your soccer coach in junior high who showed you more than how to pass a ball, but how to win and lose a game with grace. Or it might have been the band director you had who taught you more than how to finger a clarinet, but how to blend your sound with the rest of the orchestra and follow the lead of a conductor. Or it might have been that professor you had in college who showed you more than how to conduct a rigorous chemistry experiment, but let you revel in the thrill of discovery as you unlock the secrets of the natural world. Yes, all of these men and women were teachers, according to the Old English definition of that word. They showed, pointed out, demonstrated, trained, or gave instruction in printing, time telling, coin recognition, soccer ball handling, clarinet fingering, and the safe storage of chemicals. But they were more than that. They were educators in the true Latin sense of that word, as we all know. They drew us forth. They let us out. They awakened and inspired our love of learning. I'm still not satisfied, though, with either of those words. A psychology class I took in high school launched my fascination with the human mind that became my own life's work. But you know, I don't even remember anything about that class, not even the name of the teacher. But Mrs. Harsh, now here was a person who fascinated me with her enthusiasm, her grace, her generosity, her gentleness, her curiosity, her patience, in short, her character. I wanted to grow up to be just like her, so no wonder she was unforgettable. So what do I call her? Teacher doesn't capture it, and neither does the word educator. I want a more all-encompassing, more magnificent word for her. So I'm going to call her a witness. Writing about the gospel, Pope Paul VI said, above all, the gospel must be proclaimed by witness. Modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it's because they're witnesses. So all of us sitting here today have inherited the responsibility to be the witnesses to truth we have the honor to pass on to the young people God has put us in charge of, using our own gifts to further his mission on earth. We are witnesses to his love as we dedicate ourselves to the good of the other in everything that we do. And if we rise to this pinnacle of witness, our lives just speak out loud in the lessons we give in reading or science or history, but also in the way we handle a classroom, interact with a child, talk with a parent, and even answer an email. St. Francis of Assisi put it this way: preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. Because they're watching, our students, their parents, and our colleagues, and learning about what it looks like to be a faithful woman or man of integrity. A life like that is so appealing that others want to imitate it, and when they do, they take a little of who we are into their own lives very deeply, and then they become witnesses too. The baton is passed, the truth lives on, a teacher is a witness. Now it happens in the most natural of ways. A few weeks ago, I came home from a trip on Southwest Airlines. The plane was full, and as we were disembarking, I found myself behind a mother and her little 5-year-old daughter. The two of them were so cute. Every time the mother did something, her daughter imitated her exactly. So when the mother maneuvered her carry-on luggage so as not to get in the way of another passenger, the little girl did exactly the same thing with her own little bag. And when the mother thanked the flight attendant for a nice trip, her little girl said thank you too. And when the mother was careful to pick up a piece of paper from the floor and throw it in the trash bin, her daughter did exactly the same. And noticing what her daughter was doing, the mother smiled down at her little girl, who looked back up at her and said, "I do everything you do, Mommy." I smiled too, watching them both, because it was marvelous to see such a good witness at work. They say values are caught, not taught. And this teacher, in this case a mom, was demonstrating values of consideration, care, kindness, with a piece of luggage, a word of thanks, and a scrap of paper. And her daughter was catching her values as she mimicked her behavior in each and every little instance. Marshall McLuhan, the communications scholar, said, "Our children are the messages about our values we send into the future." Wouldn't you love to see that little girl 30 years from now as an adult woman witnessing exactly those same values to her own children? It would be marvelous. Indeed, our adult characters are the results of the messages our teachers launched into the future all those years ago. And so if today we love learning for its own sake, how to be gracious competitors on and off the field, and if we do our work each and every day for the greater glory of God, then our teachers of long ago can look at us with pride. The arrows they sent into the future hit the bullseye. Now we're the archers. Our students are the arrows that we are sending into the future world. But are we always conscious of what message is tied to that arrow? And if we were, would we always be proud of it? It's a very important question to consider, because the truth of the matter is that whether we are conscious of it or not, we are sending messages about our values all the time, everywhere, to everyone we meet. Whether we're in a classroom, at a faculty meeting, accompanying parents and students on a field trip, or at home melding schooling with family life. We never stop teaching. We're sending messages about our values just as powerfully when we speak at a community meeting, or host a Thanksgiving dinner, worship in church, or have coffee with our friends. They never stop learning, and we know this to be true. I remember once in my early working life, once our boss started habitually coming late to meetings, no meeting of any kind ever started on time again. We learned that promptness wasn't important to him, and so it didn't need to be important to us either. And driving on the interstate one day, very recently, traffic at a standstill and an exit just a half a mile ahead, one car pulled out off the highway and onto the shoulder and sped toward the exit. 30 seconds later, 6 other cars did the same thing. That driver taught everyone else on the road that the rules of the road don't apply when they get in your way. And what parent hasn't looked at a 4-year-old and asked, "Where did you learn that word?" And what mother hasn't heard herself say, "I can't believe it, my mother's voice just came out of my mouth." Yes, teachers and students are everywhere. We're highly sensitive to this truth when we see it operating to the detriment of our own children. So we're careful about what schools we enroll them in. We're careful about their social media use. We're careful about their friends. We don't want them taught badly by example. But are we equally careful about ourselves? "Watch yourself and watch your teaching," wrote St. Paul to Timothy. "Persevere at both tasks. By doing so, you will bring salvation to yourself and all who hear you." Yes, indeed, in the end, salvation is what it is at stake. The stakes are exactly that high. Theologians writing during Vatican II put it this way: believers can thus have more than a little to do with the rise of atheism, to the extent that they're careless about their instruction, or in the faith, or present its teaching falsely, or even fail in their religious, moral, and social lives. They must be said to conceal rather than reveal the face of God and of religion. Now, isn't that the most horrible thought? That I could be the one who conceals the face of God by being careless or thoughtless, or behaving inconsistently with my beliefs, and thereby failing in my duty as a witness? And by the same logic, as a teacher, could I unwittingly discourage a student or dampen a love of learning by being careless about my lesson preparation, thoughtless about my reactions to a classroom problem, or inadvertently forgetting myself when I interact with a student's parents? Perhaps so. And as sobering as this thought is, though, there is no reason for us to be discouraged or to despair. We can learn how to be better, stronger, purer witnesses in and outside the classroom. So how do we do that? By watching and imitating a master, of course. And so now let me take you to the classroom of such a master. The famous opera tenor, Cheryl Milne. Where did he go? We lost his picture. We are not, however, going to learn how to sing. Instead, we're going to learn how to watch ourselves and watch our teaching, just like St. Paul tells us to do. So let me begin by introducing you to Cheryl Milne. I'm going to show you this picture of him. There he is over on the left. Because unless you're an opera fan, you might not know anything about the boy who was not born very far from here in Downers Grove back in 1935 to parents who were dairy farmers. Besides working on their farm, Dad was the pastor of their Methodist church. Mom was the organist and Cheryl's first music teacher. As a child, Cheryl sang in the church, as well as to his father's cows, and learned to play all kinds of instruments. As a teenager, he gave up his ambition to become an anesthesiologist and decided to become a music teacher himself. After he got his degree, he kept singing in churches, in community choirs, and in little theaters. The call to perform, though, growing ever louder, he went out of his way to ask to study privately with some of the most sought-after voice teachers of the day. Hermann S. Bauer, Rosa Pontel, Boris Goldovsky, and he was a self-admitted sponge to all of them. Now, with their encouragement and with the mentorship of Boris Goldovsky, that's the guy on the right, in particular, he began a slow climb through apprenticeships in minor operas to debut eventually at the Metropolitan Opera in 1965 when he was 30 years old. He served as the principal artist there for 32 years and sang with prestigious opera companies all around the world. But then in the late 1990s, a vocal cord injury meant he could no longer perform at that elite level, and his opera performance career came to an end. But Cheryl Milne's misfortune was my good fortune because I got to see him at work at Northwestern University, where he was offering a master class open to the public. Introducing himself, he said, "I consider myself a teacher who took a detour of 40 years to sing around the world." So if you've never been to an opera masterclass, it's simple to explain. One at a time, 3 or 4 students sing for an acknowledged master in the art so they can benefit from his coaching and advice. The catch is that the master's feedback is given in front of an auditorium full of people like me. There is a Japanese proverb that says, "Better than 1,000 days of diligent study is 1 day with a great teacher." And it was amazing. I had exactly that day with him. So first up on the stage was a young man, tall and slender, who had chosen to perform Nessun Dorma from the famous aria from Puccini's Turandot. His voice was huge, and I couldn't help imagining his mother looking at him, remembering him asleep in his little crib, and then wondering, where did this voice come from? When he finished singing, Professor Milne thanked the young tenor and then said, "Your voice is strong and well controlled, and the music was beautifully rendered. But I must tell you, we don't like you." Now, can you imagine saying something like that? Something in this day and age and in front of a whole audience of people, and we're all shocked. And the young man looked abashed, and Professor Milne turned to us in the audience and he said, "You didn't like him, did you?" And it was true, we didn't, and so we shook our heads. He turned back to the young singer and gave him a powerful lesson on witness. He said, "It is the character you're singing we don't like. Remember who you are. You are Caliph, aching in love for the cold-hearted Princess Turandot. The audience needs to be a part of your longing. They need to feel the ache. They want to root for your victory, but you leave them out in the cold and out of the picture entirely. Your singing is all about you." No. You've got to reach out to them, bring them to you, bring them in. Do it with your voice. Your voice is beautiful, but you're paying too much attention to it. It's a means, not an end, a means to draw you and your audience together. If you use it well, then long after the people in the audience sitting here tonight forget your name and the song you sang, they will remember how the opera made them feel. Did it make them laugh or cry, fill them with joy or pathos, touch their hearts or take their breath away? Accomplish that, and your audience will come back to the opera because they want to feel that way again and again. And you want them there. Because in an empty opera house, no one gets to hear that beautiful voice of yours. And it also means that the beauty and the glory of the art of opera itself die a little because of you. So, you're entrusted with a great responsibility. And my advice is, when you stand on the stage, forget about your voice. You have prepared it well. Pay attention to the audience. Now sing it again. And of course he did, and we all cried. So Maestro Milne's lesson applies to us too. We teachers are not singing Puccini. But we are singing songs, so to speak, in history and science and critical thinking, and at the same time, drawing our students toward a lifelong love of beauty, truth, and goodness. Certainly, we must prepare our lessons well, just like that young tenor must prepare his voice well. We can't skip that step. None of us can just take content off the shelf and teach it without fully absorbing it, but neither can we fall into the trap of thinking that a lesson we've lovingly prepared is the end of our work. Our real work, our essential purpose, is to offer ourselves in such a way that truth, beauty, and goodness continue to shine bright in the world and set our students alight. So my point is obvious, we all know this, but there's an enemy trying to undermine us. One of my grad students once asked me what I thought was the hardest thing about being a teacher. The first thing that popped out of my mouth was stamina. It's absolutely true, wouldn't you agree? While the yoke of being a witness is easy and the burden light, even the strongest mule gets tired after a long day in harness. How often have I seen eager, open-hearted young professors become disillusioned, closed-hearted ones simply because they were worn out? It's hard to be up for winning over a new group of students at the beginning of every year, year after year, answering the same questions, overcoming the same resistance, correcting the same mistakes. Our tiredness might show up at first in bags under our eyes or a short temper now and again, but the most telling symptom to watch out for is the one that feels pleasant as it destroys. On the way to Emmaus, Jesus asked the two men, "What were you talking about?" And as we know, of course, their conversation was brimming with the miracle of Easter. Now, if he'd run into a couple of us university professors, on the other hand, he might have heard, "Oh, we were just griping about the food in the cafeteria, commiserating about the extra work our department head just loaded on us, complaining about the administration, and bemoaning our obtuse students." Do you hear a faint echo of your own conversations in mind? I imagine once in a while you do. We all have it rough, and it's natural to want to complain to people who will commiserate. But we have to watch out, because the first symptom of tiredness going self-destructive is exactly this kind of complaining. While we feel good for a moment, blowing off some steam to a sympathetic ear, complaining that doesn't lead to problem solving only serves to harden our hearts in cynicism, and we become a dangerous source of our own and each other's discouragement. So we have to take these signs of discontent seriously and work at combating them before they corrupt our teaching. And the job is a lot easier when we have a friend to help us see the path of light and love in the midst of work that will always be full of temptations to weariness and discouragement. Friendship works at Weight Watchers, at Alcoholic Anonymous, with exercise buddies and faith-sharing groups. As St. Thomas Aquinas said, there is nothing to be prized on earth more than true friendship. And it's always nice to agree with one of the big saints. I could not have carried on all these years without my good friends. They help me keep fighting the good fight and running the race. They hold me to a standard of excellence and integrity. They point out my shortcomings, but always with love. They offer me guidance, encouragement, and comfort. I trust them because they're striving to be models of integrity too. So perhaps you already have such a friend. It's wonderful if you do. Please cherish him or her. But if you don't, and I hope the first thing you'll go back and do after this conference is look for someone like that and cultivate him or her. You need someone to help take care of you that way. Guard yourself against weariness. Lean on a friend. We can't stay faithful and true without each other. So now let's head back to the master class for another lesson. The second singer that afternoon was a soprano who had been listening in the wings to her classmate and to the advice that Professor Mills gave the student before her about the importance of making an emotional connection with the audience. So she walked out confidently to the center stage and began to perform a light, joyful opera from Mozart's The Magic Flute. She was bursting with energy and over-the-top emotion, and her arms just punctuating every single word. So he listened carefully and then said, "Calm it down." An audience always knows faking when they hear it. You cannot put on emotion. The audience will see it as the manipulation it is. So stay authentic, be true. If you are, the audience will believe you and will respond. You don't have to make it happen. You don't have to, if you just do it right, it happens all by itself. That's another hard lesson for us from the opera maestro. Professor Milne was warning his singer about the perils of failing to respect her audience and trying to cover it over with style. The same lesson applies to us. If we want to be credible and trustworthy witnesses, we can't let it happen to us. We have to be consistent in our thoughts, in our words, and in our actions. Even more than using weariness to undermine our enthusiasm for our students, the devil loves using it to tempt us into inconsistency, because the resulting disintegration ruins our credibility, our trustworthiness, and our authority. St. Peter warned, "Stay sober and alert. Your enemy, the adversary, stalks about like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him." If we don't resist, if we let ourselves be devoured, then sadly we merit the same two words the Pharisees and scribes heard 15 separate times from Christ's own mouth: "You hypocrites." Now, I hate to think that Jesus would ever accuse me of that, but if he were to spend a week in my company, he would very likely have cause to look at me with pitying eyes and say, "Lisa, aren't you sure you're being just a teensy-weensy little bit inconsistent here?" And some days I'm afraid I am, and so I have to keep at myself, examining my behavior at the end of every day, looking for inconsistencies and asking God again and again to help me get rid of them. I don't want my failed human nature to become an excuse for what's really a lack of awareness, a failure to pay attention to my effect on someone else, or just sheer laziness. St. Teresa of Avila said, "Be gentle to all and stern with yourself." It's good advice, worth taking to heart, at least it is for me. All of us who are parents know about this weakness too. We've all had those days when we're exhausted and exasperated, and we answer a child's quizzical look about something we've done by saying, "Do as I say, not as I do." And in that moment, we've let one of those little failures in integrity happen that we never intend and are always trying to avoid. But we're tired or stressed or busy. And besides, it's just one time and nobody's perfect, and surely there's little harm done. But unless we stay vigilant and keep after ourselves day after day after day, before you know it, we've done more of the same everywhere, and our integrity is in shreds. That level of watchfulness is very hard, but I learned from the late Harvard professor Clayton Christensen, a devoutly godly man who guided his students and business people over many decades, that it's easier to hold to your principles 100% of the time than it is to hold them 98% of the time. He called it the 100% rule. Now, on the surface, that sounds impossibly difficult. I know, but let's look at a hypothetical example. So let's say that one of the most important principles a person has is in never taking anything that doesn't belong to him. A person of integrity never steals. But one day, he realizes he doesn't have any paper for his printer at home and doesn't have time to get to the store, and so he just takes a ream from the office. It's not that big a deal, it's just this once. The behavior isn't 100% aligned with his values, but 99% isn't so bad. But having broken his vow once, it's easier to do it again. And in another small way with some other office supplies, just one more time. 98% isn't so bad. So maybe next time he pads his expenses a little. It's such a small amount, it's only once, then twice, then pretty often. He deserves it after all, he works so hard. Now we're down to 80%. And then maybe one day he adds a little extra money to an invoice from a supplier and keeps the difference for himself. Nobody notices. No one notices a second time either, and so soon it's second nature. Where are we now? Maybe down to 20%. And then one day, the auditors do find out, and the police show up, and the jail cell awaits. Something our young man never intended or envisioned. It was just a ream of paper. Yes, indeed, it's a very slippery slide down from 100%. I know this level of discipline is extremely hard and it takes tremendous energy. So it helps me to remember these lines attributed to Lao Tse and to Mother Teresa and Mahatma Gandhi. They don't know who, I'm sure you've heard them too. Watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your values. Watch your values, they become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. It's just another version of the 100% rule, and it's a rule worth following. So back to the classroom for one more lesson. The last student of the day was another young man who sang a very difficult aria from the Wagner opera Siegfried. He was magnificent, full of the confidence and power of that dragon slayer, and all of us in the audience were just blown away by the performance. When he finished, Maestro Milne said to him, "I don't have much to say to you. Your work is very, very good. And so to you, I offer the advice that will take your singing from very good to great. Remember, you're singing an opera in German, and someday you will audition for this role, perhaps in front of the artistic director of the Berlin Opera. Now, who do you think he will want to hire? An American with a gorgeous voice who speaks pretty good German, or a tenor with the German language pulsing in his veins?" So let me tell you the 5 mistakes Americans make when they sing in German. And if you can eliminate those, your language, the German language, will pulse in your vein too. And the artistic director will think you were born in the fatherland. So here we have our final lesson from the opera maestro. The details make or break an opera singer. They make or break us too. They say the devil is in the details. If we get the details wrong, we undermine our witness, and the devil is in the details. But also, God is in the details. If we get them right, our witness goes from good to great. So it behooves us to keep an eagle-eyed watch as we interact with students, colleagues, and parents, or with anyone for that matter. G.K. Chesterton once said, "Every encounter with another human being is a chance to encourage or discourage him." Again, that seems like a strong thing to say and can't possibly be right. But think about how someone can change the quality of your day just by the way he says good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I went to the doctor last week, and his medical assistant came in to check my vitals. She was a perfectly competent young woman wearing a sweatshirt over her scrubs, like a sweatshirt jacket over her scrubs. It was a little cold in the office, so I didn't think anything of it. But when she turned to walk away, I saw that the jacket had a huge skull and crossbones logo from a heavy metal band on it. I thought, in a doctor's office? I say, it did not put me at ease. In the old days, before tattoos were completely commonplace, the UPS company required its drivers who had arm tattoos to wear long-sleeve shirts even in the summer. Tattoos scared old people. And airline pilots are very well schooled in the idea that they carry the public's confidence in airline safety in their bodies. They do it so well we don't even think about it. That's why pilots wear uniforms on Southwest Airlines, even if the flight attendants are in shorts. And that's why you won't see an airline pilot drinking in an airport bar, even when he's off duty. And why you won't see a pilot napping on the early morning bus from the hotel, even if all the other passengers are sound asleep. A sloppy-looking and acting pilot would worry me. Wouldn't it worry you? Yes, people notice the details, even if we're not conscious of them. But the good news is that gradually, as our integrity grows stronger and purer, the details take care of themselves. But it never hurts to be reminded just how important they are. Several years ago, my husband and I helped care for a dear friend in New York during his long struggle with and recovery from pancreatic cancer, and all the many complications that followed that were even more challenging because he was trying to continue his work as a Roman Catholic priest and a seminary professor at the age of 82. Now, after one of his rehospitalizations, the doctors didn't feel that Father Joe needed to go to rehab, but they did insist that he have several weeks of close care before they were confident he was out of danger. So I volunteered to stay with him in New York and take care of him. The rector at the seminary where he worked agreed and offered me a room so I could stay. During those weeks, I did everything that all caregivers do for their loved ones all the time. I prepared his food and I helped him shave. I ran his errands and gave him his medicines and talked to his doctors and visiting nurses, and we prayed his daily prayers. And then late one evening, as I was carrying a basin of dirty dishes down to the kitchen, I ran into one of the young seminarians who offered to carry it for me. And as we walked along together, he said, "You know, Lisa, we study love every day in our classes, and now we all watch it walk in the hallways." Oops, it always makes me cry. He said, "I'll never forget this, not the rest of my life." Now, as you can tell, even recounting this moment, which is the story's 10 years old, never fails to bring tears to my eyes because it was such a beautiful compliment. But I have to tell you that it also filled me with another feeling that I don't know how to describe except that it's awfully close to fear. In that moment, I suddenly realized that in my behavior, in the way I live my life, God has given me real power. The power to affect other people. And in this case, to encourage a young man at the dawn of his vocation by doing something as small as washing the dishes of a sick and elderly priest. And dear God, if I have that much power, do I not have an equal and opposite power to discourage? By failing to act in a situation with the love and kindness a Christian woman is supposed to have at the very center of her being. You bet I do. Yes, we little people have power, immense power to affect our students and ultimately the people they will become someday. It is a most precious and humbling and thoroughly humbling trust. May God make us worthy. So let me sum up our lessons straight from the Opera House with thanks to Maestro Milnes. Our purpose is to witness truth, beauty, and goodness in our teaching, fanning that flame so it comes alive in our students. Our preparation is the means to that end. Weariness is a witness's biggest enemy. The right kind of friend is our best support. Consistency is the foundation of credibility, trustworthiness, and authority. Hold tight to the 100% rule. And the audience is watching. God and the devil are in the details. Henry James, the Victorian author and educator, wrote, "A teacher affects eternity. She never knows where his or her influence ends." Yes, we have power, we have influence, we touch and shape eternity. So now I'm going to conclude this afternoon with one last story about one small teacher's effect on the great eternal. He's my teacher, a witness in the mold of St. Francis of Assisi. His name's Brad Bennett, an ordinary man I met at work. Now, before I knew anything else about Brad, I could see that he was different. At the time, I would have said he radiated something. He was lit from within, and he just simply fascinated me. He reacted to situations differently than I would have, more gently and wisely. He seemed to always know what to say to give someone encouragement. He knew how to stay calm in the face of a crisis and respond rather than just react. He knew how to ask a question that helped a colleague see the solution to a problem. He never spoke badly about anyone. On the one hand, he was just an ordinary business executive. But on the other hand, it was abundantly clear that he was unlike any other person I'd ever met. So finally, one day we sat down to lunch, and I said to him, "Brad, where does this light on your face come from?" And he simply said, "From Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior." Now, he knocked me dead in my tracks because, you see, at that time, I was an atheist. But because I respected his integrity, I was willing to let my curiosity start a conversation that led to lots of questions and answers and a mutual sharing of experience. Brad made it safe to ask and to learn, and so a bridge of trust was built between us. And soon I was on my way over to the ravine that separated us to his side. So my journey of conversion took its next step in an invitation to his church, Willow Creek Community Church in Barrington, and continued in scores of spiritual conversations that often started over breakfast and finished at noon. Brad walked the entire path of my conversion from atheist to Roman Catholic, with me tearing up with tears of joy as he watched one of the father's prodigal daughters be brought home. And 15 years later, we are still walking together, talking as we go, and the light of his faith lived out in his life is still teaching me. Watch yourself and watch your teaching. Persevere at both tasks. By doing so, you will bring salvation to yourself and all who hear you. I think St. Paul would look at Brad and say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So this is where I end, and I want to thank you all, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ, for all your attention this afternoon, for all you're doing for the next generation, and you'll continue to do for the next many, many years. I want to thank you for being at this conference and always wanting to strive to improve, and may God bring to completion the good work he started in each and every one of us. So thank you.